You know what, I'm sick and tired of being censored. I'm just gonna say it. The tellers and fabric that keep our universe together are pretty overrated. Maybe I was wrong. Despite how stubborn some of us may be, changing your opinion on something is perfectly natural, and if you're someone like me who's been reviewing music in some shape or form for almost a decade, absolutely inevitable. As your tastes evolve and change, as well as all the different life experiences you'll end up going through, it should be encouraged for people to reflect on their takes, to see how accurate they are to the person they are now. Actions speak louder than words, which is why I decided to make this video talking about 10 albums that I flip-flopped on. Maybe I used to hate them, and then there's bits and bobs or even whole parts that have grown on me. Perhaps it'll be an album that I used to have a burning passion for, but just over the years, for some reason or another, it's dwindled on me. But I do consider myself to be someone that's kinda wholesome, so I'll start with an example of the former.
Billy.
So when this album dropped, I feel like I was just at my most nitpicky, and in the case of Wibba Fodwiga, I just couldn't see the forest for the trees, and since it came out and with every subsequent listen, the sheer weight and, dare I say, legacy that this album holds at this point becomes all the more impossible to ignore. What initially could shallowly be referred to as the shadow to Lord Sonic is a whole beast in of itself, like the Werehog, which makes this video the one and only time that character is ever brought up positively. You've no doubt heard this album, so I don't need to bore you with the talks of its surprise maturity and insight, the heavy lyrical themes littered throughout, and of course the genuinely joyous and occasionally intimidating production, which even at its most conventional is no less mesmerising. Singles like Everything I Wanted not only prove that this wasn't a fluke, but that the future looks even brighter for Billy and our brother Felix, and while they do not need any well wishes of success and support considering all the success they've had so far, I do hope that all of their future efforts prove to be just as fruitful as When We Fall Asleep. I'm glad that I realised that I wasn't too cool to listen to Taylor Swift sooner than most. Granted, not soon enough, because during the early 2010s I was definitely one of those folk bashing her for having too many songs about ex-boyfriends and how she got outdone by a goat scream version of her song Trouble. 1989 was the start of my redemption arc, and I must stress, I mean the album and not the year. My time machine isn't that good yet, but it wasn't until 2018, maybe even 2019, where I started to give her discography as a whole a revisit. There was albums I hadn't listened to before, like Fearless, which were great, and there was albums that I was just sort of like coming back to again after so long not checking them out, and I just felt like such a fool for swearing them off, especially when it came to the album Red. I've talked a bit about my change of opinion about this specific era in my Overhated Songs video, check that out by the way, but I really do dig how effective Taylor balances her country roots and plants the poppy seeds she'd soon reap, mainly for the better and only one or two occasions where it's for the worst. If an album is good enough to make the prospect of hearing Ed Sheeran on a sappy ballad more tantalising than it is terrifying, I'd consider that a success in my books. Not perfect, you can thank Trouble and Stay for that, but a great time? Absolutely. So after two positive pop turnarounds, it's time for two drastic changes of opinion that would have 16-year-old Liam well and truly in his feelings. Starting with You would not believe how obsessed I was with this mixtape. This was at the peak of the Odd Future renaissance. My iPod was just littered with Tyler, Earl, Domo, Genesis for some reason, and of course Frank Ocean. My Twitter is home to some evidence showing how much I was into Nostalgia Ultra, but sadly that's not the case anymore. I think that comes down to this mixtape often feeling like it's more concerned with being a glorified covers compilation, and very rarely does it work in its favour, though granted, one of the best songs on here, and one of my favourite Frank songs in general, comes in the form of Coldplay's Strawberry Swing. Just such a natural fit, and the emotion he brings to it is just so palatable. But boy, I mean, there's a cover of The Eagles' Hotel California, an already lame song that isn't very much better on here, and a cover of MGMT Electric Feel, which is just so janky. I can't believe that this was even included on here. And what makes this all the more frustrating is that it's got songs like We All Try, Swim Good, Novocaine, amongst some of Frank's best material. It just makes this such a double-edged sword of a mixtape, and usually I'm against artists putting older songs on their debut albums, but I wouldn't have been averse to the kind of good songs that I've mentioned so far appearing on Channel Orange, because yeah, Nostalgia Ultra is a mixtape that while I do get excited to listen to because of the good examples, as soon as I remember what else is on here, I usually don't muster up the energy to put it on. But as much as I might be ragging on it right now, that's nothing compared to the album that I'm about to discuss.
She was telling me you went to New York.
I've already made it quite clear that I was the type to seriously consider spending 30 quid on socks with donuts on them, and while I'll always have a soft spot for the Odd Future era of the early 2010s, Goblin has aged like milk left out in the blazing hot sun. I'm not going to beat around the bush here, I used to really like this album, but nowadays I would consider this one of the worst albums I've ever listened to. If you like this album, then fair dues, but I just find it to be chock full of insufferable lyrics and shallow, shock value imagery, topped with an overindulgent runtime and production choices that boggle the mind, but not in a good way. I'm sure you'll find defenders of this album saying, oh, you couldn't make songs like She nowadays, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, but why would you want to listen to a song like She out with a solid Frank Ocean performance, but one that is wasted on a song like this that you could get anywhere else? There are only two positives I can muster up about this album. Point number one, and I know my younger self would agree with me on this, Yonkers is still a banger, especially now that any tasteless slurs can be seen in a new light. And secondly, there's no denying that Goblin is an ambitious album, and while I can criticise it for a myriad of reasons, I wouldn't call it lazy. It's the kind of scope and vision that would make albums like Igor and Flower Boy, and to some extent Wolf, hit all the harder. The execution on those albums is just a lot better. And while I dislike this album, it's turned 10 this year, and looking back on it, I'm still glad it exists, even if I do strongly dislike it, because it represents a bygone era. It's like a fossil of an album. It has inherent worth in that regard, and it also just goes to show how much growth that Tyler and Co have undergone over the past decade. Out of all the turnarounds, flip-flops, crocs, whatever you want to call them, that I've shown in this video and will show for the remainder of it, Die Lit is the most significant, biggest turnaround, and definitely the best documented. Who knows if this album will eventually grow on me, but I've gave it 3 or 4 goes at this point. I don't see why so many people were positive about it. Fair enough if you are, but it's not clicking with me. It just sounds like every other track released this year. I regularly find myself just laughing at how much my opinion has changed on Die Lit. I feel if I'd met myself 3 years ago and told them just how much I enjoy this album and how extensively that I've listened to it, I would just fear the butterfly effect that would happen as a result of that interaction. What was just a run-of-the-mill trap album is now a blend of hip-hop that reminds me of all the reasons I love genres like dream pop. The production from Pierre Bourne is just so hypnotic, and as pointed out by so many at this point, that combined with Carti's ad-libs and peculiar deliveries results in something that is equal parts savage and beautiful. This album isn't just great on its own merits, but just personally is like this really big reminder of how drastically an opinion can change, and obviously every album that I mention in this video to some extent or another is to show that. But when it comes to music conversations about album growers, I just have this like auto response, this involuntary response to just say the words Die Lit whenever that comes up. I've come to terms with the fact that this video will largely serve as a big dunk on Wee Liam, the biggest of them all, the one that I'm about to show just now, just the bit of evidence to show just how much I loved AM. Sake, man, don't give young people access to the internet if this is what happens. Out of all the albums that have grown off me over the years, none have dipped as violently as the 13th track on Danny Brown's Old, quite the way AM has. As has been made clear already, I was obsessed with this album, and even now it's not hard to see why I would get attached to this swagger, rock god attitude of a song like Are You Mine that still slaps to this day. Nowadays though, I feel AM sticks out like a sore thumb in Arctic Monkeys' discography. Compared to their debut, it lacks the lyrical, everyday man prowess that skyrocketed that album to cult status. Compared to albums like Favourite Worst Nightmare or Humbug, it doesn't quite instill the same confidence with its performances, sometimes getting a little bit tepid or minimal for my taste. In my opinion, everything that AM wanted to be and was striving for would ultimately be fully realised 5 years down the line on Tranquility Base Hotel Casino, an album that I still like a fair bit, and I'll come back to this album for a handful of songs, but the pizzazz and appeal is much like Alex Turner's David Brent goatee, gone, though in the case of that facial hair, that was for the better. And from one 2013 let down by a beloved Naughties act to another. Like any old millennial / young zoomer, I had and remain to have a really soft spot for Arcade Fire, and Reflector was like the first kind of moment in my relationship with that act where I was watching the whole rollout happen from like the Cryptic Origins all the way to like the eventual double album. And 8 years down the line, even though my opinion has kind of like got a bit more negative, or is like far less positive than it used to be, I remain to be more on the positive side of the opinion spectrum when it comes to Reflector. I would say I and many others are still valid for liking this album. The title track is a dazzling slow burner that is the most natural, albeit no less impressive segue between Arcade Fire's gloomy indie roots and this new disco aesthetic, thrown in with moments like Here Comes the Nighttime and one of my favourite Arcade Fire gems, Hey Orpheus. Things still look pretty good for Reflector. Back in 2013 and probably like as recently as like 2018, I would have said Reflector was like on par with The Suburbs and Funeral, and would have even said that it was better, like dramatically better than Neon Bible, which in hindsight feels like flipping off your granddad. It just felt like a total disrespect to my elders. It's not groundbreaking to say Reflector's runtime is its Achilles heel, and that a compact single disc version would definitely fare better. Hell, even if you got rid of the closer supersymmetry, you'd feel a weight off your shoulders. The same goes for the rather clunky flashbulb eyes. That being said, while I'm no longer under Reflector's Aphrodite spell, out of all the albums listed in this video that I've grown off, it's the best, and I'd still say it's a good time. On that note, let's make like Zagreus and leave this hellish pit of disappointment to return to a more godly example. Seeing Hayley Williams on this thumbnail, you may have thought, wow, Williams went off Paramore, like, does After Laughter not hold up 4 years after it came out? If the rose-tinted glasses broke and an album like Riot or Brand New Eyes just aren't as good anymore? No, the iron grip that Paramore have on me has just got all the stronger. Yep, the album that I'm going to talk about is the band's 2013 self-titled effort, and when I say I wasn't big on it, I ain't kidding. If I were to try and like point a finger at what caused such an illicit reaction to this Paramore album, I would just need to admit that I had a really regrettable phase as like a late teen of thinking I was just too good for pop music. Maybe a lot of you watching just now had that same phase when you were a bit younger, maybe a bit older, but yeah, I think that's what caused me to just look so negatively upon this record. And it's so much more silly in hindsight because Paramore were never unashamed about being a poppy act. You'll never guess what the first half of pop punk stands for, but on this 2013 record they like were just a lot more unashamed about it. Case in point, a track like Into You, which back in the day when it was pretty inescapable on music channels, was super saccharine sellout fodder as far as my younger self was concerned. I was just so blinded by my rage that the rest of the album never really stood a chance. I was nitpicking mad at anything that didn't immediately satisfy my taste. Knowing what I know now, I 100% deprived myself of an array of fantastic pop and rock tunes. Fast in My Car, Daydreaming, Grow Up, Last Hope, and of course anyone familiar with a particular video of mine will know just how much I love Ain't It Fun. Worst of all is that I could have cut this petty pop hating phase short by a year or two had I given this album a fair go, as this self-titled effort is a natural, satisfying palette swap that is pretty much my bread and butter for pop rock nowadays. All of this is to say that I'm a fan of pretty much everything Paramore put out at this point, and it just brings me a fair amount of joy knowing that the band's future is as bright as their fans' hair tends to be. Yep. For context, I loved Colouring Book. It was number 3 on my blog post about the best albums of 2016 back in 2016, and that was above records like Worry, Blonde, Stage 4, The Dream Is Over, A Moon-Shaped Pool, Bottomless Pit, like so many albums, so many great albums that came out that year, and I just find it so funny because all the ones I listed there are among some of my favourites of all time, while Colouring Book just exists. The big day in hindsight should not have been as much of a shock, seeing as Colouring Book channels some of the same flaws, albeit in less aggravating forms. Corny, wine-inducing lyrics, gospel production that sometimes crosses the line into caricature, and a runtime that just does not justify the lactic acid build-up in my legs. Also, in my notes here, I've just put down Juke Jam sucks, and honestly, I'm not going to elaborate on that any further. I don't want to be too hyperbolic and kick Chance Willies down, because a song like Blessings, Angels, No Problem put a big smile on my face, much like they did when I heard them for the first time about 5 years ago now. It's just a shame this is a rap album that has grown off me, whereas the last album that I'll discuss today is one that I used to really hate, but I'm now a lot more fond of. Initially, I was going to include a few more albums on this list, but there was a theme throughout them all that just became pretty hard to ignore, that being that they were all albums I went into with low expectations because of an unfavourable review from Mr. Fantano. I did want to highlight Little Peeps Come Over When You're Sober Part 1 for that reason, but this record here seemed to get the most scathing review for the longest time, so I feel it's owed more of an apology. In recent years, my journey through the Drain Gang pipeline have been pretty well documented. It was always going to be a case of when rather than if, because my love of Young Lean. But when it came to Red Light, I had some very low expectations because of said review, and it was and still is such a peculiar release that I just don't think I ever gave it a fair shot. Granted, even though I have a more fully fleshed and more positive opinion on Red Light, I'm not in love with it, and I don't even think it's all that great. I still think it's one of Blade's weakest releases, but like the only way that I can describe my relationship with this album is like you get given your very first bike and it's a bit clunky and you haven't got to grips with staying balanced and changing gears, and like 10 years pass by and you come back to it. You've tried loads of different bikes since then that are a lot more enjoyable to ride about, that are just generally a bit more good or a bit better, and while that makes your first bike look a bit rubbish by comparison, now that you know what to expect and how to handle it, you just have a much more enjoyable time than you did the first time around. Pretty accurate metaphor, especially your bike has ever said, heard you say you want to die, just do it like Nike. Though I think Raleigh buffed that kink out. While my turnaround on this album wasn't quite as dramatic as Die Lit, I properly did hate Red Light for a long time, which made it the ideal candidate to close out on. There's no point trying to future-proof opinions. You will change, your views will, what you want out of music will. There's no point in being scared that your review will age poorly because what you say about an album, whether it's a tweet, blog post, video, conversation you have with your cat, it's documentation of what you felt at that time. I had a blast reflecting on all this music and just seeing what I had to say about me, about my taste, just kind of like what I look for in music and what it has to say about me as a person nowadays, as a critic, as a human being, and as a wannabe musician who can only play Feels Good Inc. and Psycho Killer on the bass. That being said, I just think that never feel like you have to kind of live and die by an opinion. If you hate an album, just feel free to do what I've done just now and say, you know what, don't hate as much anymore. No one's saying you have to do that. Just reflect on the media that you consume, and even if it's like a few months after it's came out, give it a go. Maybe an album that you hated before actually has a track or two that you really like and that you'll take away from it. Maybe an album that you love, there's actually stuff to it that makes you love it even more. It is just so worthwhile to just kind of think about what you consume. By all means, enjoy media the way you want to enjoy it, but I just think reflection is just so integral to making that enjoyment all the more fulfilling. Just do it. At the very least, maybe you'll get a 20 odd minute video out of it that makes a few people giggle. And that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please save me some face and let me know albums that you've flip-flopped on down in the comments below. If you liked the video, then I would appreciate it if you gave it a like and did the usual jazz, subscribe and whatnot if you haven't already. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate all the patrons who support me. The names are on screen just now, the £3 patrons. That gets you in the credits. £1 a month also gets you early access to all the videos that I put out, which will probably go to a haircut. No, actually, I'll pay for the haircut. I'm trying to put any money I get just back into what I do here, and yeah, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you all very soon, and as always, stay safe and stay hydrated. Also, Kirby is not an incel. Please, nobody comment that Kirby's an incel.